You know that moment when a narcissist does something hurtful and instead of owning it, they flip the script and make you feel like the problem? You're left replaying the situation in your head, wondering how the blame shifted so quickly. That's not an accident, it's their survival strategy. A narcissist will lie, gaslight, and twist reality before they ever admit they were wrong. Because for them, responsibility feels like exposure, and exposure threatens the fragile image they fight so hard to protect. They can charm, they can manipulate, but what they'll never do is look you in the eye and say, I was wrong. And if you've ever been stuck in that cycle, carrying the guilt for what they did, this is where you finally understand why it keeps happening and why it was never your fault in the first place. Accountability threatens their image. For a narcissist, responsibility isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Their entire identity is built on a carefully crafted mask, an image of being superior, flawless, or always in control. To admit fault would mean exposing the cracks in that mask, and deep down, they can't handle that level of vulnerability. When you point out their mistakes, you're not just confronting their behavior, you're threatening the false reality they've worked so hard to maintain. That's why instead of owning up, they attack, deflect, or shift the blame onto you. Because if they ever said, you're right, I was wrong, the perfect version of themselves they're desperate to protect would collapse. And for them, protecting the mask will always come before protecting the relationship. Blame shifting protects their ego. When a narcissist is cornered with the truth, their first instinct is never to admit fault. It's to make you carry it. They twist the story so skillfully that by the end of the argument, you're questioning if maybe you really did cause the problem. This isn't clumsiness, it's strategy. Shifting the blame keeps their ego intact. If you become the guilty one, they get to stay untouchable. They'll exaggerate your reaction, highlight a small mistake you made, or even drag up the past to distract from what they just did. And the longer you're in the cycle, the more exhausting it becomes, because every attempt to hold them accountable ends with you holding the weight of their actions. Blame shifting isn't about the truth, it's about control. And as long as they can keep you doubting yourself, their ego stays safe. Gaslighting keeps you off balance. One of the most powerful tools a narcissist uses is gaslighting. Instead of acknowledging what actually happened, they deny it, twist it, or rewrite the story until you're no longer sure of your own memory. You can bring up something they said or did, and they'll look you straight in the eye and insist it never happened. Or they'll claim you're exaggerating, too sensitive, or remembering it wrong. Over time, this constant rewriting of reality makes you question yourself more than you question them. That's the point, gaslighting. Keeps you off balance because if you can't trust your own perception, you'll lean on theirs. And once they control the story, they control you. It's not about the truth. It's about keeping you confused enough to stay quiet and doubt yourself instead of doubting them. They confuse responsibility with weakness. For a narcissist, responsibility isn't a sign of maturity, it's a threat to their control. Admitting they're wrong feels like giving up power, and that's something their ego will never allow. To you, taking responsibility shows strength, honesty, and character. But to them, it looks like weakness because it means they'd have to acknowledge they're not perfect, not always right, and not always in charge. That's why when you try to hold them accountable, they fight harder, twist the narrative, or shut down the conversation completely. In their mind, the moment they admit fault, they lose their grip on the dynamic. So instead of owning up, they double down. They'd rather protect the illusion of control than face the truth. And that's why no matter how clear the evidence is, you'll rarely hear them say, I was wrong. For them, control will always outweigh honesty. Their fragile self-esteem can't handle guilt. On the surface, a narcissist may appear confident, even arrogant, but beneath that facade is a fragile self-esteem that can't handle the weight of guilt. Even the smallest mistake feels unbearable because it threatens the image they've built to convince themselves and everyone else that they're flawless. To admit fault would mean confronting feelings of shame they've spent their entire life trying to bury. So instead, they push the blame outward. If something goes wrong, it's always because of you or the situation or someone else. anything but them. This isn't just about avoiding consequences, it's about survival for their ego. Guilt is like poison to them, and rather than drinking it, they'll pour it into the people closest to them. That's why you often end up feeling responsible for things you didn't do, because their fragile self-immune simply can't absorb the truth. Control means never being wrong. For a narcissist, control is everything. The moment they admit fault, they lose the upper hand in the relationship, and that's a risk they won't take. If they acknowledge they were wrong even once, it opens the door for you to question them again, to hold them accountable, and to see that their power isn't as solid as they pretend it is. That's why they fight so hard to stay right at all costs. It's not about truth, it's about control. They'll argue endlessly, twist your words, or drag up things that don't even matter just to keep you on the defensive, because as long as you're busy proving your innocence, they don't have to face their guilt. In their world, being wrong is the same as being powerless, and a narcissist would rather destroy the relationship than give up that control. Apologies expose vulnerability. For you, an apology shows strength. It takes honesty and courage to admit you were wrong. But for a narcissist, saying, "I was wrong," feels like exposing a weakness they've worked their entire life to cover. Their identity depends on maintaining the illusion of being superior, untouchable, and always in control. An apology would mean admitting they made a mistake, and that risks showing cracks in the perfect image they've built to protect themselves. That's why even when the evidence is undeniable, they avoid saying the words you long to hear. They'd rather stonewall, deny, or blame than let you see that vulnerable side, because in their mind, the moment they admit fault, you gain power, and they lose it. For them, staying silent or doubling down feels safer than exposing the truth that they're not as perfect as they want you to believe. You carry the weight they refuse to. The cruel truth about dealing with a narcissist is that their refusal to take responsibility doesn't just leave situations unresolved, it leaves you carrying the weight they should have owned. You're the one who ends up questioning what happened, replaying every conversation, and wondering if maybe it really was your fault. Their denial becomes your guilt. Their silence becomes your confusion. And before you realize it, you're carrying not only your own emotions, but the burden of theirs too. That's the cost of their denial. It drains your energy, clouds your judgment, and leaves you stuck in a cycle that was never yours to begin with. And yet, the fact that you feel this weight says more about your empathy than your weakness, because while they refuse to face the truth, you've always been the one strong enough to carry it. The healing comes when you finally put that weight down, knowing it never belonged to you. Living with a narcissist denial leaves scars because you end up carrying the blame they refused to touch. But the truth is, that guilt, that confusion, that emotional weight, it was never yours to begin with. The moment you recognize that, you start taking your power back. Healing doesn't come from making them admit the truth. It comes from freeing yourself from the responsibility they never had the courage to face. If this video gave you clarity, subscribe and come back here whenever you need a reminder that you are not to blame. And let me ask you this, have you noticed how often you've carried responsibility for things that were never truly yours?